Okay, I'd like to call the February 28th meeting of the Advisory Committee to order at 7:31. And I would entertain questions from the public. Our public tonight is Dennis Friedman. Questions from the public regarding matters not on the agenda? No questions, okay. Additional items for the record, I do not have any this evening. Matters not anticipated within 48 hours of the meeting date, I do not have any of those either. So I would like to turn directly then to discussion of warrant articles. Tonight we will be considering articles labeled O and P, and they have to do with tax relief. And Jim Taylor will be presenting them.
Great, thanks, Karen. You'll find in your folder drafts for O and P. Now, these relate to the tax relief. Now, if you recall, we had a presentation, we received a presentation from the town administrator back in November. The Board of Selectmen have considered tax relief to be one of their primary objectives for the year. So if you recall, they were presented with a number of different alternatives on tax relief, some targeted and some broad. The Selectmen ultimately decided on a little bit of each. They decided to, what they would like to recommend is to increase the tax work-off program by $20,000, as well as to utilize the meals tax revenue to help offset some of the future taxes that citizens would bear. So what Article O proposes basically, it asks for the authority to transfer from the general fund a sum of money to, once again, offset taxes. Now, as a little bit of a background, if you recall, in 2010, the town meeting authorized a meals tax. A meals tax is 0.75%. At the time, meals tax revenues was projected to be anywhere from $200,000 to $250,000 a year. The actual receipts have far exceeded expectation. On average, tax receipts from meals taxes are running around $600,000 annually. When that tax was approved, it was placed in what was called the Meals Tax Stabilization Fund, and no specific use of those funds were yet authorized. So those have been accumulating in two places on our books, if you will. The meals tax raised prior to this year were effectively deposited into the Meals Tax Stabilization Fund, and I'll get to these in a moment. That fund currently has approximately $744,000 in it. Additionally, in the past year, meals tax funds have been accumulated, but not yet added to that specific Meals Tax Stabilization Fund. But these are the meals tax revenues that have been again generated through the meals tax. That number is approximately $640,000 of funds. So collectively, there are close to a little bit over $1.3 million in meals tax. So once again, the selectmen, when reviewing all their alternatives, have chosen to use 20,000 of those funds to again increase the tax work-off program, as well as to utilize those funds to help offset some of the debt service costs that the town currently bears. As it relates to debt service, as you know, we have a number of projects here that the town has authorized debt exclusions for in the past. Presently, our debt service cost is approximately $3.6 million per year. In 2015, that debt service cost is scheduled to increase to approximately $6.6 million per year, which would result in a increase for the average tax payer of approximately $450. In addition to a couple other tax relief methods that I should also discuss is that the town has done two things. The middle school project is coming in at less than the anticipated budgeted cost. Initially, it was budgeted to come in around $61 million. The actual cost is closer to $58.4 million. Additionally, when the project was first discussed, the impact to taxpayers was based on a interest rate for the debt that was going to be raised of 4%. In fact, that interest rate will be closer to 2%. Those two provide a fair amount of savings towards the town. If you recall, we were provided with basically an impact statement, and I'm going to pass this around. I'm sorry I don't have one for the folks, for the thousands of folks at home that I'm sure are watching at the moment. But effectively, it walks through and shows that let me actually pass one around to each of you if you don't mind here, as a refresher. My apologies to the chair for not doing this earlier.
Apology accepted.
Thank you. I created a number of them. Dennis, you'll have 25 to refer to, if you'd like. What this shows that what you'll see in a moment here, this graph basically shows the impact to the average taxpayer of the debt exclusions. And as I mentioned today, the average debt exclusion for each taxpayer is right around $400 per taxpayer. And this graph also shows that you'll see a big bump. So taxpayers beginning in 2015 would bear the additional debt exclusion amounts effectively centered around the middle school. So what the selectmen have chosen to do is to try to really smooth out the tax impact by applying these tax relief methods. So once again, the tax relief methods that are being applied are the actual deduction, the cost for the middle school construction, the deduction and the interest expense for the debt. And then they would like to, in these articles, what these articles speak to, is utilize the accumulated meals tax that have been produced so far to help offset, and through the next fiscal year, help offset the 2015 fiscal year tax bump that citizens would otherwise have seen. So taking this all into account, initially in 2015, the average taxpayer, again, that's based on a home value of $651,000, would have seen their taxes basically that represent the portion being used for debt exclusion to rise to $725 per taxpayer, again, for the average home. Through all these tax relief methods, that will actually be reduced if, in fact, we pass this article, the town passes this article, to $425, a savings of close to $300 per taxpayer. Interestingly enough, we're one of the very few towns in the Commonwealth to actually be looking to provide tax relief to our citizens. And then secondly, the towns that utilize a meals tax, we're the only town that anyone knows of that is using that meal tax revenue to, again, to offset and to help with tax reduction. Other towns are using it for other purposes, generally operating purposes or capital purposes. So to be more specific about these specific articles, they're a little bit, I would have placed them in the other way. I would have put P in front of O, to be honest with you. What O does, it takes all the accumulated money that's been raised through the meals tax, but not yet added into the meals tax stabilization fund, and the anticipated revenue that we expect to be raised through meals tax through the remainder of this fiscal year to be used to offset the debt exclusions, again, in fiscal year 2015. Article P is providing for utilizing the funds already in the meals tax stabilization fund and setting those aside, again, to be used to offset the debt exclusion increase anticipated in fiscal year 2015. I believe that it will be the selectmen's objective to every year request that future taxes that have been raised through that meals tax levy to also be used to offset, to help kind of, again, smooth out and offset debt exclusion amounts in the future. But we're just now focused on basically 2015 reduction. Question was asked, why aren't you utilizing to reduce 2015 fiscal year 2014 taxes. The answer is that you see the steepness of how much the debt exclusion will be increased. Each taxpayer will basically see a big bump in their taxes in beginning in fiscal year 2015. So it was the selectmen's decision to actually wait until that significant increase occurs to help, once again, smooth out that impact that the average taxpayer would feel.
Okay,
So I am happy to address any questions.
very well done. So part of the issue here is that when there's a particular source for funds, you have to have a warrant article that takes the money from one place to put it someplace else. So the reason why this couldn't be just one article is because some of the money is housed in the general fund and some of the money is housed in the meals tax stabilization fund. And the general fund acts as sort of a holding tank for the meals tax money, because town meeting has to vote to put money into a stabilization fund and has to vote to take money out of the stabilization fund. So in this case, we're essentially skipping one step. We're asking town meeting to vote to use money that would otherwise be requested to go into the meals tax stabilization fund, to use that money to provide tax relief along with money that's already in the stabilization fund, right?
Yes.
Mr. Ennis?
Jim, in the draft comment to Article P, I think it should begin as discussed in the comment with respect to Article O.
Thank you. I'm more than happy to take any suggestions relative to my comments.
And just so, I think you have a point, I think, in sort of introducing this as a meals tax stabilization fund tax relief source. When the warrant gets ordered, the warrant is ordered at the discretion of the Board of Selectmen. So it may be a suggestion to Betty to bring up with the Board of Selectmen that perhaps to introduce this, so we may start with P instead of O.
Okay.
And in that respect, we may want to keep that comment a little fluid to move it to whatever's first. But
Thank you.
any other questions or comments on O or P? Lucy?
If we do this again next year, it'll be another vote again to move the funds, correct? Every year that we do
Every year
this.
requires that, yes.
So we're totally emptying out the meals tax stabilization fund, correct? And then we're taking the other.
Other than the
money. Yeah.
20,000 being earmarked for the
For
tax
the relief.
relief program, right?
But
Okay.
the money is not actually moving until 2000, it's moving but not being used or applied until 2015.
That's correct.
That's
It'll be
absolutely correct.
encumbered for 2015.
Mhm.
That's a good point,
And
though.
is this part of the warrant article, but it's still to the discretion of the selectmen to add any other sources to tax relief? I mean, this isn't their intention to be the sole issue of tax relief.
Something could come up other than this. If you recall, Ted presented a number of alternatives,
Right.
and these were the ones that they ultimately decided upon.
Okay.
But we don't know the exact amount because that will be used in 2015,
Right.
because it's a moving target. We don't know the amount of meals tax revenue.
So,
So it's average $600,000 a year.
but they will, whatever the total comes to, that's what they're using, whether it's
Right,
$1,300,000 or $1,000,000, the entire amount goes towards the tax
Correct.
relief.
that's right.
Any other questions? 1 second, all right? Just 1 second. Any other questions around the table? Okay. Dennis, I'd ask you to come up to the microphone.
Dennis Friedman, 445 Cushing Street. Could somebody read the article? What the proposed article is going to be?
Sure. Do you want to read it?
Oh, yeah, have you, sure, of course, Dennis.
Do you want these?
Oh, yeah, if you have one, that's fine.
Yeah, the Article O states, will the town transfer a sum of money from the general fund for purpose of reducing the fiscal year 2015 tax rate, or act on anything related thereto? And you'll note in my proposed recommendation, I specifically reference a dollar amount that relates to the amount that's been collected thus far.
So I guess two things. One is, there was a lot of discussion originally about targeted tax relief versus general tax relief. And the only targeted tax relief that I can see is $20,000 that they're talking about putting in tax work-off. But do you have any, and unfortunately I was in a lot of other meetings, didn't have a chance to attend the selectmen's meetings. So Do you know why they haven't chosen to move forward with any targeted tax relief to the general court?
I believe that was their decision. I can't speak for why they
Okay.
decided that.
I would just add, Dennis, that when the Board of Selectmen, when they did a presentation, that's actually available on their website.
Okay.
And I think there is a presentation that details all the different options that were considered and what would be required to implement some of those options. So that resource is available if anyone is interested in looking. It was a committee of folks who really tried very hard and did a very nice job at looking at a variety of options.
But-
suspect they'll discuss it at town floor on Sunday.
Unfortunately, I'll be on a plane at the time. The other question I have is, we had a lot of discussion actually a couple days ago, I guess it was, about the capital outlay and our inability to fund capital at the level that we really need to. Has the advisory committee discussed, or are you going to discuss whether these funds, whether we should be using all of these funds for tax relief when in fact we're not fully funding capital outlay?
I believe we have the opportunity to do that right now.
I think that, you raise a couple points. One is targeted tax relief. I would hope that there is further consideration of targeted tax relief going forward, because I believe that that's really the sentiment that's been expressed around this table for sure, about making sure that we can maintain the demographic that we have in town in terms of fiscal diversity, right? So my hope would be that there'd be ongoing conversations about targeted tax relief. My reaction was that the lead time on targeted tax relief, really needs to begin almost now for the next cycle. And I think that, again, and I apologize that we don't have slides for the folks at home, I think that the optic of that very steep climb on every single household in Hingham in 2015, when the full extent of the borrowing for the middle school kicks in, I think that was very compelling for this town meeting cycle. So, I think that as Jim's pointed out, this is a year-by-year analysis. I think that that was a priority of the Board of Selectmen, and, we are discussing it now. I suppose we could vote this down and leave that money in the meals tax stabilization fund, and the money that's in the general fund would then get swept into the meals tax stabilization fund. That's certainly possible. It's certainly possible for town meeting to do that as well. I don't believe we're in a position at this point to make a motion to remove money from the meals tax stabilization fund to fund capital.
Yeah, no, I wasn't suggesting that you move it at this time, but I'm saying that because we seem to have had a difficulty the last several years, and we had the discussion, and I'm sure you're going to hear more from capital outlay later about the fire department and so forth, that perhaps to Lizzie's point about kind of emptying out the entire fund for this purpose, it may be something to consider, because it is a source of funds to use. And also to your point, Karen, in regard to targeted tax relief, that yes, it does take a long lead time. That's why I was kind of surprised that nothing's been done to start that at town meeting this year, because then you lose a whole nother year before anything can go to the general court.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
I guess the only other sort of reaction I'd have to using the meals tax stabilization fund for operating capital is, I know that there was a great deal of sentiment when we passed the meals tax last time around, that we were very careful that just didn't fall into the operating budget. We took very seriously, even though it was just this 0.25% tax, we took very seriously, I think, you were you were on, so we took very seriously levying yet another incremental tax on folks, even though, we talked about it being a discretionary tax for people to go out to dinner. Hingham is now a restaurant destination. We were concerned about the effect on local businesses. The end result has been, it hasn't dissuaded most people from going out to dinner if we've got a run rate of about $600,000 annually. But our concern was that it just not fall into the bottom line, and that we get used to spending it, and that we carefully consider certain projects for it. So, I think the use of that money for capital would have to be part of that that larger conversation about the effect of that on the operating budget. I don't disagree with you on your concern for funding capital. We had this discussion a couple nights ago. I don't know if we were on TV or not. But that's sort of the analysis that went in, as you well know, it went into the meals tax article itself. So any other questions or comments on either O or P? So here's the situation for tonight. I put it on for discussion and possible vote. My reaction, and I'll defer to all of you, we do have some folks missing that haven't had an opportunity to weigh in on these particular articles. We did have a full house the night that Ted presented tax relief. So we certainly could hold off. They are in the schedule to be voted at a different time. Or if it's, the will of the quorum to vote these tonight, I'm happy to do that as well. My sense is, overall, they're non-controversial, but I sort of defer to you. So we could take action tonight, or we could wait.
If we push this off to another night, take time away from some other issues on those nights that might need the time to discuss.
I don't think so, Jim. I think we've got at least one night where we have some room on the agenda. But you're absolutely right. We're packed from now, and we've got 3 meetings a week beginning next week. So
we have three of our members are upstairs in the Board of Selectmen meeting arriving. We might have a full house towards the end of our meeting and might want to take these up at that point.
that's a good idea. So if it's okay with you, why don't we defer for now? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Look at this, right on cue. Okay, I'm a little reluctant to jump right into all of this stuff, so I'm going to take a couple minutes. We've got a couple of housekeeping items to take care of, and then I've got some general remarks to make, so I'll maybe do that now. And this is mostly for our new folks. I know that you have no doubt pored over the advisory committee handbook, but I thought it might be useful tonight to just take a look at a couple of the voting sections. Let's see. One involves me. The chair typically doesn't vote. The chair can vote to cause a tie. If the chair votes to cause a tie, the motion fails. I'll try not to vote. The chair doesn't vote. The chair, with the exception of the fact that the chair can vote to cause a tie.
And break it.
And break a tie. But if I vote to cause a tie, the motion will fail. I can vote to also break a tie. I'd like not to do that, though. And so if you see me like counting on my fingers to figure out whether I should vote or not, that's why I have my Staples calculator. And then the other is, and this is sort of a good intro, just sort of to our general discussions going forward as we approach town meeting. You know that we act by majority consent, and so the will of the majority, that's the way the comment's written, and that's what's represented at town meeting. You can, if you're in opposition to a particular article or a particular budget, you can vote against that particular article or that particular budget, and you can ask to be recorded. If you're asked to be recorded, you can rise at town meeting and speak against the majority of the advisory committee. If you don't ask to be recorded, you can still vote no, and I've done that sometimes when I'm just grouchy. I'll vote no, but I don't ask to be recorded because I have no intention of standing up and speaking against the majority of the advisory committee at town meeting. But that is that's certainly your right, and it's in our rules. I think that's it on the voting. Any questions on that?
Not to open up a can of worms, but I don't want to get into a big discussion. Whatever the vote is that going to be recorded or noted in the town warrant for people to know what the vote of the advisory committee was?
Yeah, we have discussed that from time to time in terms of a convention for a comment, and I think where we came out on that last year was if there's a close vote and we feel like that's an important fact that town meeting should consider. So the comment is, if the person's sitting in the audience, what is it they need to know about this article to make an informed decision? So if one of the things we think is important for them to know is that this was a tough question for us. We've looked at this for a long time, and we're split. We were 8-6 or whatever. I don't think it has to go in every time.
Okay.
And we've done the same thing, I think, with important articles where, did the Board of Selectmen approve it? Did Capital Outlay approve it? Other bodies that opine on certain matters that come before us. Sometimes that's in, sometimes that's not. And the same is true if we're unanimous. If we want to make that statement, we might say that as well. But some of that is up to your discretion in drafting the comment. Okay. The other thing I'd just like to say is I think that I think we've done a great job. This is also reflected in our rules too about kind of our tone of discussion with each other and our tone of discussion with members of the public and other folks from other departments that come before us to maintain sort of that respectful nature of our discussion. We can agree or disagree on how resources should be allocated or a warrant article should be passed or not. But, I think that I think we've done well to sort of maintain a professionalism. And I know that we're all getting tired. I think everybody in town hall is getting tired. And I would just urge us to push through this next couple of weeks and maintain, I think, the goodwill that we've established so far. Okay. And then I should have mentioned this at the beginning. Greg mentioned the town forum is on Sunday. Greg and I are actually traveling, not together. So if anybody else can or wants to go, please let Sue know so she
Probably
can.
should have mentioned I'm traveling as well.
Dennis is traveling too, right?
1 to 3.
1 to 3.
Same topics will be discussed as was originally planned?
That's correct. And tax relief is among them.
Is it televised?
I think it is, yeah. I think it is. Okay. So,
Is this an actual one of our warrant articles? It just doesn't have a letter on it? This
it
thing
is it the
that's-
treasurer collector?
Yeah. This just says,
Oh, I don't know where that came from.
is it in everybody's thing?
Well, I think we are going to talk about that next week.
Okay.
And that particular article, that's a draft. That may or may not be the one we vote.
Do you know, what letter is it?
Oh,
wait a
off the
minute,
top of my head,
I
I
have
don't,
it.
but it has been
S,
sent.
okay. Okay, just,
Okay. Things like right
I
now.
wasn't sure if it was something else that we were supposed to.
We have revised copies of the debt service budget in our folders. I ran out of my office and left my copy there.
Yesterday, 2 days ago?
Yeah.
I have it with me.
I can talk to it without having it in front of me. I just,
And we know the number, right?
yeah. It's pages 174 and 175.
Sue, do you need originals?
Oh, the budget book? Is it in the budget book?
I might not have copies this morning.
Where are the 5-year forecast?
It should be there, pages 174 and 175 in your budget books. Okay. I can talk through it or does everybody should probably have
Yeah,
copies.
why don't you, do you want to talk through it, and then we can make some copies? So the next thing that we're going to do, before we get into a general discussion of the forecast, is there are 3 budgets that have been affected by discussions over the course of this past week. The Elder Services budget, you heard about the targeted tax relief with respect to that. That's where that additional $20,000 from the Meals Tax Fund will be housed, so we've got to make an adjustment to the Elder Services budget. Debt service is being revised upward to take account of to add a placeholder for the high school fields project as well as a potential acquisition
Of land,
property
correct,
by
yeah.
the town. And then the workers' comp budget is being adjusted to reflect sort of a more accurate perception of where we may be next year. So, Mike, do you want to lead off with the debt
Sure.
service?
Okay, so relative to what you have in your
What page is it
budget
again?
books, 174 and 175, we're looking at. 174 is the principal part of the debt service.
Do that on camera. Spit behind me.
Okay.
Yep, if everyone's ready. Okay, so on page 174, if you look 3 lines up from the bottom, you have the debt service principal athletics field, which is for $250,000. And that's the only change in the principal part of the debt service. And what that $250,000 represents is the amortization. So right now, the placeholder for the Fields project is $3.75 million. The $250,000 represents $3.75 million divided by 15. So it's a 15-year amortization on the financing of the field. So that's a placeholder, the $3.75 million cost for the field that's going to be financed.
So the $250,000 is the principal component?
That's the principal component,
thank
right?
you.
So that's just the straight amortization of the $3.75 million divided by 15 years equals $250,000 a year.
Okay.
And so that increased that number by $250,000. That was the, so the 4.924703 number, that was the only change in the principal portion of the debt service.
So can you read that number one more time?
So the new principal amount for debt service for fiscal year 2014 will be $4,924,703.
Okay. And you're recommending that?
And I recommend approval of that. The next page, so on page 175, is the interest portion of the total debt service. So when you service the debt, you have the principal, and then you have the interest that corresponds with the amount of principal that you're financing. So again, 3 lines up where you see debt service interest athletic fields, $279,377. Which represents an increase of $75,000. And that increase is based on financing the $3.75 million at 2% a year. So the $75,000 extra in that line item just represents the interest portion of the note for the fields.
Okay.
What's the money we have on this 206? I mean, I'm sorry, looking at FY 14 on the, am I looking at the right line, that interest?
So it was 204,377 was the amount before us, 3 lines up for the athletic fields.
And that was for the same project, but it's just a different number now?
Right, because initially there was interest costs related to the feasibility, design
Okay,
of the
all right,
field
okay.
project. So that's what the 204,377 originally was for the design process for the fields. And now that we've put the placeholder in for the amortization of the note for the base, what I assume is just the base project at this point, that adds another $75,000 to the interest component, which is assumed to be financed at 2% a year.
So net, increase of $325,000.
For the fields in total debt service,
Okay.
correct.
Right, I'm sorry.
Sure.
So the 206,000 that's under the 2013 revised budget, is that for the same project?
Is it
That's-
the tennis courts and the track? Or is it just the feasibility of?
That's the feasibility portion of the
206 is the
study,
is the
correct. Yeah, the
feasibility.
206,348 is just for the feasibility study for the fields.
Right,
Sounds like a high amount for just interest for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And it's, pardon?
It's the whole article from last year.
It's
Yeah,
the
so it's a
The nine-
tennis-
it's not
the nine-
tennis courts.
975.
And the track and the
Yes,
tennis courts as well,
yes.
okay.
That's
So
the whole
basically, the
cost
whole
of-
article that was passed last year, this is the interest component
Okay.
of that financing. It was a 5-year
and
project.
then just a question of information. On Tuesday night, when Ted was here, he had in his forecast a $350,000 yearly payment for the fields if he were to put it through non-excluded debt. I'm assuming that was interest and principal?
That was, I don't,
No, it was 325.
it was 325. Now, there's an additional $25,000 that, versus the last copy that you have, which is the bottom line, which is the land acquisition.
Okay.
Now, that's something that apparently the selectmen are in executive committee about, or executive session, rather. So I don't know what that is, what that property is, other than we've assumed $25,000 of interest costs related to the acquisition of this field. Or, I'm sorry, related to the acquisition of this land, which we do not know what land that is. And if you were to look at the 15-year debt schedule, you would not find anything in the out years for this line item, because again, this was sort of a big assumption based on, I guess, what Ted and the selectmen know. But since it's not finalized, if you look at the 15-year debt schedule, you'll see the 25,000 for fiscal year 2014, but there will be nothing else in the out years.
And that's just interest cost? There's no
That's just the
principal?
interest cost,
Okay.
correct.
So what is the, is there a new bottom line number for the interest then?
So the new interest for fiscal 2014 is $2,443,521, which I recommend.
Okay. Okay, any questions on the principal or interest components relating to the fields and the acquisition of property?
I just, I guess, how I feel, but to vote on 25,000 and not know what it's being used for, I know the selectmen have a use for it, so they claim, but to not specifically know how it's gonna be used, and we represent the taxpayer of the town, I just would like to know how the money's being spent.
I
What their
agree. I
intention
don't
is.
disagree with that statement. And, you know, we're in the dark here. There's a piece of property that's being acquired. The selectmen are acquiring it.
Let me speak to that, yeah. Greg and I are not in the dark.
Okay.
This is part of an executive session acquisition. We've been apprised of negotiations
Okay.
since it started. It's not something that is public information at this point. And it is, you know, our vote would be this interest component in keeping with, or for the use of this property acquisition that is the subject of executive session. So if this property acquisition that is the subject of executive session doesn't move forward, then they don't have the authorization to spend this money.
And the acquisition will also, excuse me, need to be approved by town meeting.
That's
I
correct.
mean, so
Okay.
this isn't going to happen in a vacuum.
But otherwise, I would have raised the very same question.
I tried to get it out of Sue this morning, but she wouldn't give me
Come on,
the
Sue.
information. So I recommend for fiscal year 2014, a interest cost of $2,443,521.
Okay. Elder Services, do you want to take that?
After Jim's article, I just wanted to let you know that the selectmen did recommend $20,000 from the meals tax to go to the tax work-off program in elder services. So it would raise it from $40,000 to $60,000.
What page?
So we need to turn, I'm sorry.
Human
you know,
Services.
Linda, this kind of puts you on the spot. We talked about this before you got here, but the Department of Elder Services budget is on page 118. And it would be, there's a line for the senior work-off program. It's currently for FY14 listed at $40,000.
Could I just mention before Linda speaks to that, that the funding for this incremental $20,000, the Board of Selectmen have voted that that will come out of fund balance. So with the forecast that we received the other day, we have both sources and uses of funds. The effect of this vote would be twofold. It would be an increase of $20,000 in sources of funds. So that would go up by $20,000, and then an increased use of funds of $20,000. So the forecast and the variances that we've been looking at and that we'll be voting on tonight will be unaffected by this vote.
I'm not elder
No,
services.
I
Oh.
was say, I think elder services.
You're putting me on the spot here.
Wow.
I'm thinking, geez, that's all right. So we just changed that line then to 60,000, right? And then that makes the total of elder services is $270,720. Am I not correct? Is that what you have written? Yeah, like, so.
That's what I got.
Yes.
Okay,
And you would recommend
I
that?
would recommend that.
And Linda, would you recommend that? Okay, and the last but not least, workers' compensation.
Workers' compensation, as we heard the other night, our town administrator is recommending a reduction in our workers' comp contribution this year from originally at $300,000 to $250,000. And that again represents the experience rate with claims as well as the balance in the workers' comp trust fund. That is on page 179 in your budget books.
I'm sorry,
And
can you say the numbers again?
it's $250,000.
$250,000.
That was recommended and I believe voted by the Board of Selectmen. So I would amend our recommendation to $250,000 for FY14 workers' compensation.
Great. Okay. Any other questions on the changes to the budgets? Okay. So now, we should move to take a quick look at the forecast. So in your folders, there's, as we've done in years past, we've kept a tally of add backs. So we've funded departments generally at a level services level, and then for certain town departments and for the schools, we have funded additional requests. There's a tally of that contained in your folder. Those additional requests, as listed on the sheet that you have in your folder, are baked into the forecast, okay? There's also a sheet that shows, some of the stuff that's left on the table that folks wanted and needed, but within this particular forecast, we're unable to provide at this time. I asked Mary to include this so that we keep in mind the fact that there were requests made of us that we couldn't fund. So in the event additional resources are made available, it would seem to me one starting point would be to revisit these requests beyond level services. And then is there a forecast in our packet? Okay. So now I'll put somebody else on the spot. Tom Piles, who's just joined us from the Board of Selectmen's meeting. We heard from Capital Outlay on Tuesday night with a capital plan. We also heard from the town administrator on Tuesday night with a reduced capital plan. Tom, I'm hoping you can share with us where Capital Outlay has come out and where the Board of Selectmen has voted.
Certainly. Thank you. You have in your package yet another five-year plan, and I don't know whether the audience has this or not, but it instead of looking at it from Ted's concept of last Tuesday, I would have you think of it from what Capital Outlay voted and presented Tuesday night after that. And as you may recall, it had a budget that totaled 2.114, and based on some of the discussions we had with the town administrator on Tuesday night, we thought it very prudent to get back together as a capital outlay committee and review those suggestions, and we did that last evening. Fortunately, Craig joined us. He was absent on Tuesday night, so he had to be a quick learn. So if I say anything that is contrary to what we discussed, because I think I want to talk not just about the numbers, but how we got there. As Ray Eisenbees likes to say, let's get to the bottom line. Between the reforecasting that occurred and some of the votes that were taken, it was suggested by Ted Alexiadis that we didn't need to go as low as we expected to go on Tuesday night. In fact, at the end of the evening, last evening, what the Capital Outlay Committee agreed to was to take out the major $438,000 fire truck and defer that for 1 year. That and a small change in the police vehicle buy, which had to do with insurance rebates of $8,000, was the only changes that we had from our recommended budget on Tuesday night. So in your package at bottom line, if you go to the back page, you will see that our recommended budget is $2,091,422, of which $422,500 is funded by user fees. If you add up what we are recommending from a tax levy standpoint, it comes out to be roughly $1,668,000, down from $2,144,000, and the delta basically is the fire truck. We didn't do that in a vacuum. In fact, that makes the budget work with the adjustments that were made, some of which was the $155,000 that was a reduced budget in the education budget, and the other was the surplus. And I don't have the new forecast that reflects all of this, but I am told that the reforecast, taking all this into consideration, does actually show a surplus, albeit not as large as it was when we talked Tuesday night. Now, how did we get there? As we indicated to you on Tuesday night, we wanted to hear directly from the fire chief about the concept of not just deferring the fire truck, but the concept of looking at the fleet and looking at the real property and doing that in a planned stage so that we could know what the total needs were over a longer period of time and finance those appropriately. Again, Chief Duff was very supportive of the concept. He thought it had a lot of merit from not only the standpoint of giving us a better planning, but it enables him to look at things such as bulk purchases that would standardize the equipment and make it better from an efficiency standpoint. So he's bought into the concept. One of the questions that was asked, and I think it was very vital to our discussion, was, is this going to cause the advisory committee any pain in 2014 if the fire truck breaks down? Help me out, but I think the fire chief emphatically said that that possibility was very low. That in fact, while it's a 23-year-old truck, and it's past its lifetime and it's due for replacement, it is relatively well maintained. There's nothing major that he thinks that could happen to it, and indeed it isn't likely to be something that breaks and causes us to go to a reserve transfer mid-year.
And is this a reserve truck or a line truck?
It is a reserve truck, but they use the reserve trucks greatly.
I know, yeah.
It is called a reserve truck, but I would use that term advisedly. All of the trucks get used very hard, and there's lately, all of them have been putting in extra miles. But yeah, it does have that potential of being in reserve while the other trucks are there, and reduces the likelihood of it being broken in mid-year.
Okay.
But he did say that he would be very disappointed if 2015 came along and he didn't get not only this truck, but another truck, so that you could maximize the benefit of buying and having it all done at one time from a standardization standpoint. And he realized that, as you can see in page 2, if they did that, the buy in 2015 would be over $1 million. That isn't going to be done out of working capital, capital through the levy. He realizes, and Ted agrees, and Ted, when he made his presentation to us on Tuesday, very emphatically said that the concept would be to look for other ways of financing it other than through capital. I presented this to Board of Selectmen, emphasized that there would be a need for a large buy in the fire department next year, and that would have to be funded outside of this. And they wholeheartedly agreed and endorsed that. We hope that you would do the same. The other topic of conversation that we had was the concept of looking at not only the fire department's real properties, but other departments' real properties. There was an emphatic speech made by the head of the Firemen's Association this evening at the Board of Selectmen saying, you can talk about vehicles, don't forget the real property. That would be part of the feasibility study, which we have not taken out of this plan. It needs to be done. It needs to be done relatively quickly so that we can not only think about the fire department, but all other high-priority buildings and do that on a planned basis so that we can fund those in the appropriate way. From a process standpoint, what have I left out, Greg?
You reported exactly as it occurred.
Okay.
Well done.
So I will be recommending a capital outlay budget that is different from what we presented on Tuesday night, but
And
it
can-
basically is taking the fire
And
company.
what's your number? Can you give us the number?
$2,091,422, of which $422,500 would be done by user rates and charges. The funding of the rest of it would be basically in line with what we heard from Ted on Tuesday. The Working Capital Trust Fund provides $118,000, taking a bit from the mooring permits of $41,651 would leave the tax levy of $1,509,271. Sue, would you agree with those figures? Okay. That would be my recommendation.
I would just add that in our 5-year forecast, on the line called capital outlay, the total amount would be $1,668,922.
Which is a
Which
accumulation of those three.
Which is an accumulation of those 3 items. So when we're voting capital tonight, we'll be voting for each of the projects that are in the capital plan
Which
as
totals?
Tom has distributed it, and which total to the numbers he's just referenced.
So the other resources for capital are found on different lines.
There are, within the sources of funds, as Tom mentioned, using the Workers' Comp Trust Fund and the
Mooring permits.
that is providing $159,000.
And I think you'll see that in fund balance.
That's correct. On our forecast, if you look at the line of uses of funds called capital outlay, that represents everything in the capital budget except the country club, the sewer, and the recreation commission. So we, in general, term that as funds from the levy. This year, we have a little unusual situation in that we're using a couple alternate funding sources, but those are also captured there.
One additional thing is the Board of Selectmen have voted favorably upon this budget.
Great.
Karen,
Yes.
just a clarification, so you're keeping the study of town-owned buildings, 60K for 14, 140K for 15, and you already have the 20 allocated last year?
The 25 for this current year, which will be encumbered, so it could be added to the 60,000 and spent in 2014.
And that was encumbered for the fire department specifically?
Yes.
So Mark Duff is happy that they'll be able to continue looking at the stations immediately, or in fiscal
Yes.
year 14?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And if you looked if you were at our meeting that we discussed the feasibility study, we were given a breakdown of phases, and the fire department would be the number one phase. And the Board of Selectmen basically said, even within that phase 1, the fire department is the first thing that we're going to be taking a look at.
Mike?
So does the fire department then, we've got the 25 that's encumbered, is the other 60? So I guess what's the estimate for the fire department? I mean, I think we can all agree the fire stations something needs to be done on those without a doubt. But I guess what else is in this 60,000? Because I hate to do my Columbo and, you know,
No,
but, you know,
yep.
get back to the whole accounting issue of how this is classified.
Do you have that number? There are several different buildings, and they were prioritized by needs. And if you bear with me, I can actually tell you exactly which ones those are. Is the second page of that?
I might not.
You didn't
Oh,
bring
you
the
do.
book?
I have my book.
Hold on. It's under Town Hall, if I can find that.
Here it is.
Could you, okay, I'd be happy to do that. The number one the number one priority is Town Hall, then they have Plymouth River Elementary, Foster Elementary. No, excuse me, the number one priority is fire stations. But in that phase one would be included Town Hall, Plymouth River, Foster Elementary, the Public Library, and 101 Hersey Street. The spending of that money was a discussion that we had in Board of Selectmen tonight. They would urge as much upfront work done by town personnel before we actually engage somebody to do some of the other work that we don't have the expertise to do in. So $85,000 may seem to be a little for all of that work. But with doing a whole lot of upfront work by town personnel, Ted is very comfortable that that can be accomplished. Ted would have had us add $25,000 to this budget to enable us to take the feasibility study for the fire departments to a design level. We did not put that $25,000 in this plan because we think it's a feasibility plan rather than a go-to-construction plan. I think that that money should be spent in the design phase and be part of the ultimate project financing.
So,
And it gets to your point of making sure that the dollars are allocated to the right place from a CPA standpoint.
Okay, so, because I'm just trying to understand, I mean, I get the genesis of this, and the spirit of it is I don't question that, but again, originally we were looking at 200,000, and it was for an encompassing study where by spending the whole 200,000, there was gonna be economies of scale associated with that. So now we're breaking that up into 60 and 140, and again, not that none of these have merits, but I guess most of the time, my recollection is anytime we've commissioned studies, they've been warrant articles where we've brought them to town, the floor of town meeting. We've discussed kind of the guts of that, and then, it stood on its own merit. And I just worry that, like all studies, I mean, just the Aquarian study, for instance, that you could have said, hey, that's potentially targeted at a very specific asset, you can assign that cost to it. But like a lot of studies, it might result in no action, and so I don't know what the discussion was around the monies,
Yeah,
the 320
the Board of,
spent for that.
I would tell you that the Board of Selectmen share your concern, and they are basically saying, we allocated $325,000 to the water acquisition study, and most of the work that has been done either through town resources or volunteer resources, and they've used very little of that money. They want us to conduct these studies the same way.
But I'm struggling with the accounting part of it. I really am. And
Let me maybe try to help, because we did talk a little bit about that, Mike, in terms of if we use outside sources, having them apportion the cost in terms of the work that they spend on individual facilities to that facility and keeping a breakdown of how that's done. So rather than just one bill for the whole study, it can be apportioned to the amount that they spend on the fire stations, on the town hall, and on the individual schools.
And I guess these are all projects then that there's a high degree of confidence that there will be actually something done so that there's something spent.
Especially in phase one.
Phase
yes.
one, there's not
I
a
think if you think about the
question.
fire stations. and
I agree with the
Foster,
fire
Plymouth River.
stations, absolutely, and you know, I guess I'm just, you know, and I tried to take a mental list myself the other day of things that have been done around town, and there's been a lot done. And there's certainly more that needs to be done. But again, it's just, my recollection is most of the time this has come up as a warrant article,
And-
not as a capital expense, because, again, if you can't assign the cost to a specific asset, which it's then depreciated over, it's not a capital expense. It's just not. That's the accounting.
I
of
think
it.
the other point is sort of back to the your Colombo comment, which is the comment that I've made before. I think under a warrant article, we have the ability to look at a sum of money, right, and create a comment that creates some accountability or some set of expectations around the expenditure of those funds, and we don't have that here. And you know that I'm troubled by the inclusion of this money within the capital plan, rather than having this be an independent warrant article.
Capital outlay was also troubled by that, struggled with whether to leave it within the budget or not. But with some of the facilities in the state that they're in, I think the final decision was it couldn't wait another year.
Well, I guess, well, if I had a vote.
See if we have a tie?
Yeah, let's see if we have a tie. I'll be quite candid. I think I support the use of these funds to study the fire stations and to study equipment purchases for the fire station in a very targeted fashion that's going to give us some bang for that buck. I'm very leery of an open-ended allocation of resources within the capital plan for this purpose. For instance, with the water study, right? We had a warrant article and we had discussions on the accountability of those funds. We could talk specifically about that at town meeting and create expectations, and the water study committee, I think, has lived up to those, and we don't get that opportunity with this inclusion.
I sense in the last few years, when these feasibility studies come up, especially the town meeting and warrant article, and they're large dollars, such as the water, the school, fields, some people in the town, I think, get the feeling that if we vote for the feasibility and we're gonna spend the money, the project is almost it's going forward. And I get nervous with that we spend the money and, well, we've already spent it and started walking, why don't we could just continue the journey, as opposed to, there's no trail, we shouldn't be going forward. That's just my comment.
I think if you look at the priority of the buildings that we just talked about, I think there's little doubt that money will be spent on those buildings.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's vitally, I agree, Karen, with your concept. On the other hand, we would have preferred to have this as an article so that it would have been done that way. On the other hand, the Capital Outlay Committee does not want to wait another year, and it would be waiting for another year. And I don't know a way around that.
May I ask when this concept was first brought up of this study?
Well, it started with the fire stations, and it started over a year ago. The fire station, the part that's being encumbered was in the Capital Outlay Committee, and it was specifically for the fire stations.
Sure, let's
So
keep the fire stations
okay,
to the
but
side.
that started the ball rolling. And then it basically said, okay, we're about ready to go in and do a study that's going to be on the real property for the fire stations. They said, that isn't the only thing that we need to have a study on that would give us a better planning tool to effectively help us not only plan for when the dollars are going to be needed, but how to finance those. And the Capital Outlay Committee basically feels very strongly they need that as a tool to help us do the planning and do the financing of not just the fire station, but all the buildings that need some help. And there are many buildings that are going to result in large amounts of money that can't be funded through the Capital Outlay Group.
And just to add to that, Tom, the discussion at that point, Mike, was that the fire department would not spend that $25,000 last year, encumber it moving forward, and that there would be a warrant article that would encompass doing that type of a study on a wider range of facilities in town. The surprise was that warrant article did not appear.
But it should have. I mean, I guess that's my point, is that I agree with the fire station stuff, and if you could tell me exactly what's apportioned to the fire station project, I would be completely comfortable with the accounting of that, because we can assign it, and I think we can really agree with a high degree of confidence, say that yes, there's gonna be something done on the fire stations, but, you know, the rest of this, you can't say that, and, you know, I guess it's just, again, it could have been a warrant article, it probably should have been a warrant article for this all-encompassing town-wide study, so that we could sit and say, okay, you've outlined the 5 projects for the 60,000, but what are the other projects for the 140,000? And that, you know, in a warrant article, we could have really kind of gotten the granularity associated with that and really, you know, debated the merits of this study as a standalone. Because, again, it's just, you know, to me, it's the merits of the study we can agree to disagree on, but the accounting of it, based on everything I've looked and seen and know, it doesn't fit the classification of a capital expenditure. It just doesn't.
You have a bite at the $140,000 next year.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I
But
think maybe
that
it's
does
the-
not have to
well,
continue
I mean,
in this
maybe it's
capital budget.
maybe it's this, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, if, you know, we're behind the 8 ball right now is what you're saying, and you want to have this study done, is it possible to just study the fire stations and then this $140,000 and maybe whatever is remaining from this year's appropriation, and, you know,
Make it a warrant
split it up and make it a warrant article? Plymouth River and Foster, while I know they're going to have needs, they're not as dire as the fire station, so you want to get the fire stations done this year. Can we then have a warrant article, start planning in May, after this town meeting, for a warrant article that will fund the remainder and the balance of the buildings in town, and that way it would be a
I
feasible.
would be much more comfortable with that if we carved out specifically, the fire stations are a priority, they need to be addressed, absolutely. If we apportioned that to that, and not that there aren't a lot of other needs, and I don't know if Dr. Gallo's here, but, you know, we did do a plan for the schools about 7 years ago or so, and I know that there was a lot of work that went into that master plan for the schools, where what we ended up apportioning to Plymouth River and Foster was not what that plan recommended. There was actually more to it. And so I wonder if, you know, again, I mean, this is just sort of open-ended, and I wonder if this study is going to tell us more about Foster and Plymouth River than what we learned in the study that was done 7 years ago. So I would vote for this if we carved out specifically for the fire station, and then the rest was then put into a warrant article for next year.
Can I just recognize Dr. Gallo? You had a comment? Okay.
I guess I see this study differently, not as so much as a feasibility study, but as a baseline study. Many years ago, well, 2002 to be exact, we had a Gale report, and you've all heard it because it comes up time and time again, to study all of the plant resources. And for many years, as we would come forward with requests for capital, for example, we would be asked to look out 5 years and project what is going to be needed in our buildings. And so for the first couple, it's okay just to say, well, we'll include an inflationary factor. But that study now is more than 10 years old. So certainly from the school department and school committee perspective, we endorse the idea of looking at what condition all of our buildings were in as a new baseline that we can use going forward. So we certainly, as we looked at agreeing with the need for such a study, and we certainly never talked about how it should be funded, whether it should be capital or warrant article, whatever. We simply talked about this as a tool. Someone said a planning tool. As a tool that would give us some baseline information that would help us in making decisions or making recommendations about where our buildings are. So we looked at it purely as, let's assess the condition of the buildings. Let's know what's going to go bad and when. Let's have some reasonable cost estimates that we can't produce other than by just applying an inflationary factor. Let's have people with expertise, engineers, look at that. And so I think what has happened, as I think about this, is the more immediate needs of the fire station have kind of muddled the original concept as we understood that it would go forward. So purely as a planning tool, setting a new baseline that we can use going forward. And so in terms of Plymouth River and Foster, for example, we will need to be deciding over the next several years, do we still need 4 schools? Do we need 3? Do we need 5 schools? And then to decide whether or not you renovate schools or add on or whatever it is you do, you need to have good information about the cost of the things that are in those schools that would need to be replaced or broken. So, I don't want to enter into your decision-making, but I think that we saw that whole study differently. And the fact that there's now this immediate need for the fire station, we hear feasibility on the one hand, we're looking at baseline study on the other.
I think that would be an excellent argument for a warrant article.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Lizzie?
Tom, I wanted to ask you, when I tried to get as much of the capital outlay meeting as I could last night, you're deferring the fire engine and for $438,000 or whatever. And when I look at next year's capital outlay, I mean, you're looking at $4.7 million worth of requests. And am I understanding it correctly that that $438,000 engine and then maybe a lot of these other costs, maybe at least under the fire department, that you're planning on and doing maybe a warrant article or a bonding issue?
Yes, yes.
I mean, that was the impression I got, that you were trying to assure Chief Duff as much as you could that you would be
Yes.
getting that engine or whatever, but it's going to be through a bonding.
That's right. If you look at page 2 of that, and at the bottom line of the fire department, and you look at the next 4 years, not 2014, but the 4 years beyond that, you'll see that there's basically $2.5 million of funding requirements, mostly for vehicles that would be required just
Right.
in the fire department. We talked about that with the Board of Selectmen tonight, and basically said that cannot be funded through the tax levy in the capital outlay line item, and that indeed we would have to have their support in the concept of bonding that in some fashion or form, or financing it in some fashion or form. And that would have to start immediately in 2015, because effectively the need will be there in 2015.
And I think you heard Chief Duff last night. To a certain extent, we've got 2 competing arguments here. This is my first year really on capital outlay, but in the past, the plan has been, let's try to spread things out, so we'll have a levelized expenditure for major items. We kick the can down the road and defer a big item like a $430,000 fire engine. We're getting ourselves back into the thing where we're gonna have a big expenditure over, 1 year, and that's when the bonding came in, so.
Right. I mean, I get the impression,
You can't do it both ways.
he was put between a rock and a hard place last night, without a
He
doubt.
absolutely was, yep.
And he desperately wants a new engine, but, the only way he would agree was with the understanding that we would be bonding this next year, or, along with maybe another engine or whatever the other costs were, but that, and he is taking a risk, he's being a good team player, but that he's just feeling very desperate about that. Would you say that's incorrect, what I'm saying?
I think he encourages very strongly to consider financing a large portion of vehicles in 2015.
Okay.
And perhaps not just in the fire department.
Right.
And that concept was discussed on Tuesday night with Ted when he was here, that from a financing standpoint, it could be combined with the bonding that would be done for the middle school project, which is going to be done within the next 15 months. So there would be some efficiencies of the financing cost if you combined on a timely basis vehicle purchases and maybe other things at the same time that we do the middle school bond.
And he said they put it on the back of the middle school. Do we still vote as a town? it comes as a warrant article and we vote as a town, but then
Yes.
the financing is actually done.
Can bundle it all together. Individual pieces can be bundled into one overall
Mm-hmm.
bond.
Okay.
Could we get at Mike's idea by looking at the town hall dollar amount over the next 2 years, or even over just this year, and divvying it up proportionally across the schools, the fire department, the town hall? In other words, we'd be able to say we're gonna spend 15, 18, 20, 30, and it wouldn't look as a $60,000 lump sum, and then if we did spend 20,000 on the schools, it would be able to be accounted for by that, for that study?
I guess my preference would be for this amount for this year to meet the immediate need, and to allocate this $60,000 with the understanding that we are suggesting that it be used for this fire study, and that it is our further suggestion that a baseline feasibility study be the subject of a warrant article. and
So
not
you'd
part of
leave
the
the
capital plan.
140 in, you wouldn't take it out, saying that we don't want to spend that
Well,
next year?
I don't think that we.
That's next year anyways, we're not approving that.
I know, but
We
it's,
only-
people are gonna look back and say, well, your 5-year plan said, I just wonder if it would be a way of making a statement that we don't want it in here next year.
I don't know that we've ever done that, but
We certainly could note that in our comments.
Yes.
There you go, comments. Would that satisfy you?
Well, I would just say by voting this capital budget, though, we are voting a 5-year budget, or just for this year.
Just for this
So we're
year.
not approving.
Just this year.
We're just
Yeah.
gonna approve this year, so, I mean, I agree with Lucy a little bit or a lot, in that the 140 that's in there, okay, shouldn't be there either, but,
one not speak
in
to
my
that?
opinion, but I guess.
So,
your
so
comment,
you know
Jim?
what, I think we're going around in circles a little bit. One thing we could do at this point is put a hold on that 60 for now. Let's move forward and conclude the discussion on the capital plan, and,
Thank you.
One thing I think we could think about is whether we want to amend that number to tighten it up, so we think it's what folks need to study the fire stations. Or we could leave the 60 in there with our note and our understanding, and I'd be happy to reflect it in part of my comments, which, I'd give the advisory committee report, which is sort of the comment on the budget section. I'd be happy to reflect our feeling with respect to the facility study there, if folks think that is sufficient. But one way around it, I think, would be to change that allocation, to tighten it up so that the money is there just for the fire station. That would be something less than 60. The issue for me is I have no idea what that is. Is it 50?
Right, no,
So,
that's the problem.
I would point out, these numbers were created or put together by Roger through some hard work, don't get me wrong. They are not quotes. I mean, there's been no bidding, there's been no estimate. Let me ask you one question though, Mike, because I'm not an accountant. If, let's say we apportion the $60,000, the other one I'm concerned a little bit about, and I'd be curious, you weigh in here, Tom, we also deferred 2 pretty significant items at the town hall for this year in terms of the HVAC units.
Well, as the Board of Selectmen have suggested, the town hall is going to start from a committee that's already been formed to study what the needs are of
Okay.
that, and do part of the feasibility study in advance. And that's what the Board of Selectmen is suggesting to do with all of the studies.
I mean, I guess I would, Roger does a good job, and I guess in coming up with these numbers, he must have had some estimate, project by project, of what the costs are gonna be. I mean, I'm not an accountant, I just know accounting, and I'm just repeating myself.
No,
But it's open-ended.
We've struggled with the exact same thing, so.
But unless you can assign it to a specific asset, it's not a capital expenditure.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions besides the $60,000 for the town-owned
The
facility study?
$60,000 question?
It is a 60, there we go. I just am noting that, so you've added back in the trailers for DPW, so I guess my question is, Ted took a whole bunch of things out and said, we can put this off. We don't really need this stuff, we can put it off. And then we're looking at this capital plan tonight, capital outlay, saying, no, we do need this stuff and we need it in FY '14. So I'm assuming that the dump truck, and I'm assuming the stuff for the landfill, you all talked about in terms of adding back, so that it wasn't just a a
No,
numeric decision, it was a priority
We didn't add
decision.
it back. We never took it out.
Okay, it's added back to the town administrator's recommended capital plan. So one of the things I had mentioned to Ray was helping us reconcile the two different messages that we got, okay? So we got one message that said, we don't need this stuff. We're getting another message tonight that says we do need this stuff. And so what I'm asking you is, when you did deliberate last night, did you think through those differing messages?
We thought through it before we actually made the recommendations in the first place. All of it was needed. If you come back to us and say, if the vote here is that we're not gonna have enough money to spend $1,668,000, and we have to further prioritize, and we're ready to do that.
Okay, thank you. Dennis, I think you had a question.
So, since there seems to be some unanimity among the advisory committee about the way this should properly be handled, you're not powerless to do anything about it, which I think kind of the direction Karen was moving toward the end, which is you could either zero out this line and ask the selectmen to open up the warrant if they really believe it should be a warrant article, or you could do what has been suggested, which is determine how much is needed here for the fire station, which does appear to your point, to be leading toward a capital project, and zero out the rest, and that could be added back in. So I think you do have some more latitude than perhaps I was hearing some of the discussion. But the other piece is, as Dr. Gallo said about this feasibility study versus, say, an assessment, if you will, or a baseline study, there's also something that's not in here at all, and maybe it's what we just heard about, the study about Town Hall. There's the rec department, there's building 179, there's the depot, there's building 12, where the Traces program is, that with the roof is, you can see the sky through it. So I think there really needs to be somebody alluded to, talked about the master plan that was in the school department. There really needs to be a town facility master plan which is a very different thing than what we're talking about for the fire station. So I would just encourage you to move in the direction of common sense that I think you're moving, and address what needs to be done, because I think taking $40,000 or whatever to do that in this year and $140,000 or whatever it is next year, without knowing what we're going to spend that money on and how it's going to be spent and whatever, and how it's going to be all then put back together, doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
I would just add that, I think it would be logical to conclude, I heard you saying, Dennis, that the advisory committee is moving towards unanimity on this, and I think you've heard the point of view of 2 or 3 people around the table expressed pretty strongly, but I'm not sure I would conclude from that that is the unanimous opinion of the advisory committee. So I would just kind of throw that out there. I appreciate that you're challenging us to think about and reminding us about what we can do, but I would not conclude an advisory committee opinion unless an actual vote would be taken.
I just appreciate you accusing us of having common sense, so. So the one last question I have on this is with respect to the reduction of $8,000 from the police department. Since we have representatives from the police department here, I understand that you've been in conversations about this and you're satisfied that you can, okay. Okay, so let's put that down. Need a sip of my tea after that. Okay, so you should have from last time, right, a forecast. And, yeah.
So does everybody have their forecast from Tuesday? Yes. Okay, probably the easiest way to do this is if you look at your forecast for FY14, you'll probably see that there is an excess of funds of $50,863. Okay, what I'd ask you to do then, and I think this is the document we're going to be working off as we look at the budgets, in your folders is a new budget scorecard. It's about 9 pages long.
I was going to say, in a font you can actually read.
For those of you who have been kind of wondering what this looks like in bigger print, and here's what it looks like in bigger print. If you could, I would suggest, please go to the back page of this scorecard. And you will notice in the fourth column, it says FY14 Town Administrator School Committee Recommended. And if you go down to the very bottom on row H, you will see $50,862. Where did that dollar go? A little bit of rounding. And so what you see in the FY14 column, FY14 Town Administrator column, is what corresponds to the forecast that you received on Tuesday night. If you move over to the column immediately to the right, you will see that that says FY14 Liaison Recommended, and you'll notice that next to column H, the excess is $16,919. Okay? So there were two changes that got us from a surplus of $50,000 to a surplus of just under $17,000. The first difference, and you'll see this in the detail on the scorecard, is on the education budget line. A $155,557 difference. So, if you turn to page 4 in your scorecard, you will notice a difference between those two numbers. The FY14 Town Administrator column is $156,000 higher. So that was one change. The second change, if you go back to page 9, and you look at row D, it says capital funded from the tax levy. Tuesday night, the town administrator presented a forecast with capital of $1,479,422. The FY14 liaison recommended amount is what Tom just walked us through, $1,668,922, which is a difference of $189,500. So the education budget was reduced by 156, capital was increased by 189. That's a total change of about $44,000, which is what got us to a surplus of $16,919. So as we go through the recommended amounts for this evening, an affirmative vote on the liaison recommended actions contained in this scorecard would yield a $16,919 surplus. That reflects the change in elder services that was recommended earlier. It reflects the debt service, the workers' comp, and again, the capital by department.
If we, either one of these budgets, next year we have, Mother Nature takes it out on us, we are running a chance of being in a deficit or shortfall. In either scenario, whether the liaisons or the town administrator's budget with their numbers, correct? We were running to a point where we have an excess, but we do, so we have.
We have a reserve fund, and we will
Okay.
have FEMA reimbursement that will cross fiscal years. So we will
Okay.
have funding from the state for NEMO, and probably funding from the federal government for NEMO, and funding from the federal government for Sandy that may come in this fiscal year, but we will
Okay.
have a
Okay.
Can I ask a question about, after going back and looking at Ted's stuff the other night? We are putting $350,000 in our excluded debt for the fields. Am I correct?
No, it's non-excluded debt.
I'm sorry, non-excluded debt, okay. For, what is he guessing, 3.75, what was his estimate?
It's 325.
325.
Of which 250 is principal and 75 is interest.
Right, but for the total project
total-
of
well, the
3, he's saying
325 would be the debt service for that, for 3.75.
3.75.
3.75 million.
Yeah, he used the 3.75 million. So why do we do that this way, but when we're doing like the fire trucks and the fire project, will we be doing that differently? We won't be putting it, will we be putting it under non-excluded
That's
debt
correct.
also?
That's correct.
We will be doing that.
Unless it's, you know, my understanding is it would be part of the middle school bond offering, which is excluded debt. But that's, I think, just for financing purposes. I think the projected plan, which is not before us, would be to have non-excluded debt pay for those equipment purchases. So we would do the exact same thing that we're doing for the fields with respect to any non-excluded debt for equipment purchases.
Okay, so, but are we piggybacking this Fields project sort of the same way with the middle school financing?
I don't know the answer to that. I think
I guess-
if it makes sense from a timing standpoint, depending on when they would begin to borrow for the project, the idea then becomes town meeting approves the right to borrow, the right of the town to
Right.
borrow. And then it becomes a conversation with our investment banking folks to figure out the best way to package that financing. So it could be, you know, and some of it depends, Lizzie, on whether there'd be short-term borrowing leading up to, you know, full borrowing
Right.
for spending. So short-term borrowing right now, where we borrowed for the middle school, is at 0.2%. So, you know, I think there's some intent in the first year of this project for FY14 to actually undertake short-term borrowing, which would reduce the debt costs that you see in front of you for FY14 only.
Right, right. I guess I was just wondering I didn't understand the financing in terms of why, if we have this huge financing going on for the middle school, why we're not just sort of pocketing a bunch of our projects on that way, and
The
I
other
don't
issue for
understand.
municipalities is an arbitrage issue, which is municipalities can't borrow and make money on their borrowing. There are that's why people become bond counsel, right? Which I am not. I'm not an accountant, I'm not a bond counsel. So there are very particular rules about when you can borrow and for how long you can have that borrowing outstanding. So again, I think that's the decision we have to make is, can we afford this debt service?
Okay.
The packaging and the financing would occur with the professional staff.
Okay.
My understanding is that we could we could finance the schools starting this summer because it's completed, a certain percentage of the project is completed.
Yeah.
So once you get to that certain percentage of completion, you can then go out and finance it. But if we were then, obviously, the fire station project would be a year later. So this summer, when we're looking at the schools, we could either say, okay, we can do the whole cost for 20 years, so we could issue a 20-year bond this summer for the
Right.
schools. Or we could say, instead, what we'll do is we'll issue a 1-year bond for the schools
Wait
at
for the-
0.2% versus 2%.
Okay.
And wait that extra year to then wrap in the fire station, which would then be ready to be financed the following year.
Okay.
And then just in terms of marketing it to the investors that would want to buy the debt, it's a lot easier if you just come with a big single issue rather than coming in piecemeal. So
Right.
that would be the thought I mean, I don't want to speak for Ted, but I think that would be the thought process, to finance the schools for 1 year this year and wait for the fire station, so you could just wrap the whole thing into one offering and send it out to the market.
I don't want to get too
Okay.
bogged down in this,
Yeah,
okay?
I just was wondering
So,
why.
No, that's fine. Okay, any other questions before we start our process? So, just to reiterate, we're going to run through this just like we'll run through this at town meeting. So if you want to put a hold on something, put a hold on it, and we'll come back and discuss it at the end, okay? So Greg's going to be the MC. Do you have a microphone? And Mary's going to make sure we're doing the right thing. And I'm just going to watch. I'm going to drink my tea, right? All right, we ready?
Ready. First item under general government, selectmen. Payroll, $424,006. Expenses, $33,040. For a total, $457,000, $457.46. Reserve fund, $550,000. Town accountant, payroll, $348,021. Expenses, $12,555. Audit, $55,000. Information technology, $123,698, for a total for the town accountant of $539,274. The assessors,
Can you read the town accountant, the capital numbers in the far corner?
also for the town accountant, their capital budget, the recommended amount is $190,359. Assessors, payroll, $204,804. Expenses, $11,587. Consulting, $69,800. Mat maintenance, $6,000. For a total for the assessors, $292,191. Treasurer collector, payroll, $304,647. Expenses, $44,308. Tax titles, $10,000. For a total for the treasurer collector of $358,955. There's a capital amount for the treasurer collector of $6,000. Legal services, $232,000. Town meetings, payroll, $2,692. Expenses, $28,300. Total for the town meetings, $30,992. Town clerk, payroll, $169,837. Expenses, $7,707. Total for the town clerk, $177,544. Elections, payroll, $6,850. Expenses, $10,845. Total for elections, $17,695. Community planning, payroll, $604,357. Expenses, $56,857. For a total for community planning of $661,214. Bear Cove Park, payroll, $16,233. Expenses, $5,333. Total for Bear Cove Park, $21,566. Town Hall, payroll, $188,856. Expenses, $349,617. Total operating budget for Town Hall, $538,473. There's a capital recommendation of $103,651.
Hold.
Total general government budget, operating budget, is $3,889,096.
I think you skipped GAR.
My apologies. Between Town Hall and the total is GAR Hall, $12,146. The total is still $3,889,096. Public safety, police department, payroll, $4,525,219. Expenses, $317,500. Total operating budget of $4,842,719. And there's a capital recommendation of $157,750. The fire department, payroll, $4,306,420. Expenses, $380,875. Total operating budget, $4,687,295. There's a capital recommendation of $64,000. Dispatch services, expenses, $675,000. Total budget for dispatch, $675,000. Animal control, Payroll, $50,508. Expenses, $3,700. Total budget, $54,208. Harbor Master, payroll, $132,794. Expenses, $43,516. Total budget, $176,310. Public safety utilities, emergency water, $364,424. Street lighting, $183,000. Total budget for public safety utilities, $547,000, $547,424. Total public safety budget, operating budget is $10,982,000. $10,982,956. School department, payroll, school department budget is shown as a single line item, $41,838,228. And there's a capital recommendation of $550,734. Public Works and Facilities. Projects Engineering, payroll, $211,689. Expenses, $19,000. Road building and construction, $300,000. Total budget for projects engineering, $530,689. Highway, Tree and Park, payroll, $1,763,745. Expenses, $398,164. Snow removal, $504,325. Resurfacing, $282,835. Total operating budget for Highway, Tree and Park, $2,949,069. A capital recommendation of $362,000. Landfill and recycling, payroll, $436,748. Expenses, $859,481. Total landfill recycling operating budget of $1,296,229. And a capital recommendation of $65,000. Sewer Commission, payroll, $285,612. Expenses, $238,421. Engineering, $10,000. MWRA charges, $1,588,865. Hull intermunicipal agreement, $120,799. The total sewer commission budget, $2,243,697. And they have a capital recommendation of $162,500. The total public works and facilities operating budget is $7,019,684. Human Services, the Health Department, payroll, $288,990. Expenses, $19,735. Total operating budget for the Health Department, $308,725. Elder Services, payroll, $188,737. Expenses, $21,983. The Tax Work-Off Program, $60,000. Total operating budget for Elder Services, $270,720. Veteran Services, Elder Services has a capital recommendation of $25,000. Veteran Services, payroll, $77,924. Expenses, $4,334. Benefits, $290,688. Total Veteran Services budget, $372,946. Health Imperatives, $2,500. South Shore Women's Center, $3,500. The total human services operating budget, $958,391. Culture and recreation. The library, payroll, $1,223,094. Expenses, $256,016. Total operating budget for the library, $1,479,110. Capital recommendation for the library, $144,428. The Recreation Commission, payroll, $78,773. Total for the Recreation Commission, $78,773. There's a capital recommendation for the Rec Department of $55,000. Trustees of the Bathing Beach, payroll, $17,035. Expenses, $5,825. Total operating budget for the trustees of the Bathing Beach, $22,860. Celebrations, $10,920. Total operating budget for culture and recreation, $1,591,663. Enterprise funds for the country club. Total budget is $2,213,456. There's a capital recommendation for the country club of $205,000. Debt service for maturing debt. The recommendation is $7,368,224. Employee benefits, group insurance, $6,305,485. Other other post-employment benefits, $1,172,000. Contributory retirement, $3,718,860. Workers' compensation, $250,000. Unemployment, $50,000. Mandatory Medicare, $714,420. Total operating budget for employee benefits, $12,210,765. Unclassified, insurance, property and liability, $381,000. Claims and incidental, $10,950. Total operating budget for unclassified, $391,950. The total Article 6 operating budget stands at $88,464,413,000. For Articles 4 and 5, the budget amount is $225,000. The total of Articles 4, 5, and 6, $88,689,413. Capital to be funded from the tax levy, $1,668,922.
Hold.
Point of order?
Yeah,
The capital,
You don't hold.
that's just
that
a
is the sum
summary.
of the-
Did you want to hold something in particular?
No, I just sort of wanted to make a comment, but that's all right then. You can't hold it then? You don't?
So you were, what you were meant to do is hold a particular budget when we were going through, and so when
Oh, I
Greg
see.
said-
Okay, nope,
But
then
if there's a
forget it.
particular project you want to hold, that's fine.
Nope, 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 that's okay.
Okay. Okay, so capital funded from the levy?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so total state assessments, the overlay and other is $1,212,930,000. So the total uses for fiscal 2014, $91,571,265. Total sources, $91,588,184 for a budget excess of $16,919.
Great, great job. Okay, so let's go back to, I don't know, because depending on what the hold, what happens with the holds. Yeah, I guess we could do that.
Last year's we voted
Yeah.
all of the ones that weren't held.
Okay. All right, so do I have a motion for all the budgets with the exception of town hall, dispatch, and debt service?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor of the budget with the exception of town hall, dispatch, and debt service, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Those budgets carry. Okay, so now we go to town hall, and I believe it was Mr. Barclay.
I just, that gets back to the capital plan and the discussion we had about the fire station and the rest of the projects. I'd very much like to see it a specific number related to the fire stations, which I think we can with confidence say there will be something done on those, and whatever that number will be, plus the 25 that's been held towards the projects or the expected projects.
So you're talking about the $60,000 that would be allocated in the capital plan for town hall with respect to townwide facility studies?
Facility studies, correct.
So would you like to make propose an amendment to that amount, or what would you like to do?
I would like to, well, again, I don't have the numbers as to what what that 60,000 should be, but I'd like to make an amendment that 60,000 capital expense, only, the amount that only be spent be related to any project related to the fire stations, as we've discussed.
This is tricky. So we're encumbering that $60,000 in the capital plan for fire station expenditure, for expenditures with respect to fire department, I guess, needs, right? Because it's equipment and.
Needs.
The $25,000 is a 2013
Right.
expense already appropriated. So there's no need to do anything on that. That won't be spent in 2013, so it will be encumbered and available for
And that-
2014.
Specifically
And that
targeted
was-
to the fire department.
Right. The only other clue I think I could offer money-wise is there was a number of $25,000 that the town administrator was discussing when we were thinking about perhaps pushing off the facilities planning study to next year. The town administrator was recommending an additional $25,000. And if I could recall the percentages, the rationale for the $50,000 was sort of backing your way back from architectural drawings to sort of design schematics as a percentage of total, projected project costs. That's where he was coming up with his $50,000 for the fire station. So one alternative would be to recommend a reduction in the $60,000 to $50,000 on that basis. I guess without, Mike, frankly, without sort of checking further into this as a procedural matter, I'm not sure what our feeling that this is the way that money should be spent. I'm not sure what that does. Dick, do you have any thoughts?
I don't know either.
We need Dan Dwyer.
Yes, where is
Was the 50,000 number including the 25 that was encumbered, or
It would be 25 plus 25.
plus 25?
So 60 would come down.
So 60 would come down to 25.
I recall the conversation going that the additional $25,000 would be above and beyond the feasibility aspect, that we take it to a design and construction document level. So it wouldn't be the same type of dollars, it'd be different dollars, but it'd be for that specific project.
Okay.
So can I just say, so what you're saying is you want them just to work with the fire station, but not like town hall, what was it, Plymouth River, Foster, is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm saying is that the feasibility study, again, it's an accounting issue, but unless you can assign a capital expense to a particular asset,
Right.
it's not a capital expense. And so the feasibility study, which is a town-wide study of all the facilities, we can't say with a high degree of confidence that those expenses will then be assigned to a particular asset. The fire stations, and I think we can all be confident that there's going to need to be work on that. And so by assigning monies specifically to the fire stations, we can then say that the money spent will then be wrapped into the total cost of whatever the work on the fire station is. Because then you will have a capital asset over which it'll be depreciated over a certain number of years. And that's the definition of a capital expense. So that's why the other things, we can't necessarily assign them specifically to assets over which they can then be depreciated.
The only thing I disagree on, Mike, you can after the study's done, because you're going to portion the amount of money spent on each element of the study to the asset that it was used to study.
But that's assuming that's making the study a foregone conclusion that there will be work done.
But see, it's not a feasibility study. It's a facility capital expense study. And, excuse me, I think it's known that every asset has to have a certain amount of maintenance, ongoing, replacement. So I think we could do that.
But doesn't there have to be a certain amount of time between when that expense is expended and then it has to be assigned to that specific asset? So if we, just hypothetically, we looked at any one of those projects outlined in the first, and it was decided, well, actually, the study said, well, this doesn't need to be worried about for 10 years. I guess that's where I'm not clear what the timeline is. But again, this is, on a number of fronts, could be a warrant article. We know the fire station needs to be done. That's a real pressing need. And I personally, I can say with a high degree of confidence that whatever we spend on a study for the fire station will then be wrapped into the cost of the fire station. I have no information about any of the other projects that are outlined in here. Again, if this had been a warrant article with a town-wide feasibility study, we would be talking about what that list is that Roger put together in terms of his recommendations, and we don't have that information.
No, we don't have, I think the only thing we disagree on is the way that we could tie things together. I think, I said it before, it would be much better as a warrant article, no question. And I think what we're trying to get through here is, what do we do this year?
So that's the question. So there's been a hold on the budget. There's been a concern expressed about directing the capital allocation to town hall under this article for fire station study. And the question is, Mike, do you want to amend the amount in some manner? Or, as I said, I'm happy to express our view on this. I just don't know that it's I don't know that anyone cares.
Well,
I don't know if it carries in.
well, maybe not. I guess my only concern with amending it to a specific amount is I wouldn't want the fire station project to get shortchanged.
Right.
That's my concern, is by trying to put a number on it and then it goes to 52,000 for the study,
Right.
it's above the approved amount. And so that's why I'm, I don't have the information. I don't know. I haven't seen any of the numbers related to what the scope of the study would be for the fire station or anything like that. So, truthfully, it's impossible for me to assign a number. It would be kind of guessing. They did say 50,000. I guess if people are confident that that number was a good number, then I would go with that, but I would hate to shortchange the fire stations by trying to put a number on it.
So if you're not proposing a reduction in the 60,000, it strikes me that what's left to us is some way to memorialize our intent with respect to that expenditure. I think we could communicate that both to the Board of Selectmen, who would be the ultimate sort of supervisors of these funds, as well as to the Capital Outlay Committee. I think we could potentially, if folks are interested in expressing this view, that, our preference in terms of our ability to do our job, to make sure that the allocations of funds we feel is sort of well documented and well accounted for, our preference would be to see future requests for this kind of funding in a warrant article.
Yeah, because other than laying out an algebraic formula to try to word how we would numerically put a number around it, yeah.
Does anyone?
Just one other thing, just from your suggestion about needs and timing. If you look at the 5-year plan, the buildings that they're talking about in phase 1 have significant capital items out in that 5-year plan. So they have needs. The money is going to be spent on those buildings. It's just a matter of making sure that that's all there is and what the timing and what the costs are.
Lucy?
It seems like we're mixing apples and oranges, and at the fire station, the plan was this year to spend 25. We're putting it into next year, and then we're getting into design, and we're spending it specifically on changes we know we need to make. And the other buildings that are involved in phase 1 and phase 2 may need changes, and it's more of either a baseline or a feasibility study, and they may also have capital amounts in the 5-year plan. So I'm gonna go back to, does this have to be under town hall? And can we put either a comment in that says, we really don't think we're gonna spend that 140, or can we take that out?
I think we have enough apples and oranges in the air. I think we should leave the 140 out. I think if it's the will of the advisory committee, I'm happy to write a letter or whatever to express our concern that future allocations take the form of a warrant article. I think for right now, and I agree with you, I think we are talking about apples and oranges. I think what I'm hearing from Mike is it's his sense that the most immediate need should get the immediate attention and should get sort of if you're looking at these dollars in terms of a whole bunch of projects, I think what I hear Mike saying is the immediate need is the fire station, and the expenditure of those dollars should start with the fire station.
Based on what I've heard, yes, because we already know from last year we're carrying an amount forward for the fire station. So we know that that's been talked about in the past. That's an immediate need. The rest of this is just coming at us, with not a lot of specificity.
In a way we can't. I guess it's just in a way we can't really think about it.
Could we, again, this is getting nuanced, but say that the amount to be spent of the $60,000 is only to be, on the fire station, the needs of the fire station project.
If we want to vote on that sentiment, and I can think of a way to convey it as formally as I can, I will do that. I really just don't know what effect that will have. Mary?
I would, struggling with this as well, I think perhaps a message that might alleviate some of the concern, not all of it, is to suggest that our vote tonight on the $60,000 does not necessarily convey support for future phases and the funding mechanism for those phases. So the vote on the $60,000 does not imply anything other than the 60. I realize that that's the case with capital projects, but perhaps if in that way it was somehow documented, it would allow the necessary work to happen so that we don't find ourselves a year from now wrestling with the same thing and just a different dollar amount of money.
Yeah, I agree, because I don't want to shortchange the fire station, so I don't want to put a number on that. So that sounds good to me.
Okay, so I think before we move on, I'd like to take a vote on, or straw poll, or what have you, because if I'm going to do this, then it needs to be our collective voice, and otherwise not. So I would like, and what I guess I'd plan to do would be to draft something and have all of you look at it before it goes, just so you're on board with what the sentiment's going to be. So I'd like to call for a vote as to whether the advisory committee should convey to the Board of Selectmen and the Capital Outlay Committee our desire to have the expenditure of funds under the capital allocation of $60,000 for Town Hall to be spent to address concerns with respect to the fire facilities and equipment. And that future requests for funding for a townwide facilities study take the form of a warrant article. So 2 parts of that. Any discussion on?
So the first part is that it's only spent on fire?
Yep.
And this study, maybe a little bit behind the 8 ball, this study is not only to just study what exists for assets in terms of the buildings, but the potential to maybe a new building or an additional buildings.
For fire? Right.
And this is anticipating future growth in the town and needs to meet that growth.
Well, it includes that, but I mean, I think more immediately, it's the condition of the north and
Absolutely.
south
No,
stations
yeah.
needs to be addressed.
No, I'm just
5
saying.
years ago, frankly. But
Absolutely. I just want to make sure we're not just addressing the immediate needs and then saying, well, we did the study to refurbish the building and then find out, well, we've had such growth, we need either
No,
another building.
that
or
would
both.
absolutely be considered as part of it, at least, from what
From
we've
what we've
heard
heard.
from the town administrator and the fire chief.
The real issue here is we haven't, and we discussed this at capital outlay, we didn't have a chance to define what the study was really gonna be. And Roger very nicely articulated, I can't really tell you what a price is gonna be until we decide exactly what's gonna be studied. And, it's focused on existing assets with a look towards, additional needs in the future. But I do have a problem with us calling it feasibility sake. It's not the feasibility of doing something, it's really what do we need to, first and foremost, what do we need to do to maintain the assets that we've got, so.
I think
Dennis
what-
has actually made an interesting and I think good suggestion.
Dennis, you sit in a different seat now, Dennis.
But I would actually raise the conversation or bring up the point that the 60,000 be moved to the fire capital budget.
We could do that.
That's what she said.
I guess that's,
It's capital outlay, guys.
are you all right with that?
Excuse me?
I don't know that that's the way this study is going to be conducted. It's not going to be conducted by the fire chief. It's going to be conducted by under the auspices of Roger, I think, right?
Roger's been tasked by Ted to lead the effort.
So I'm just not sure I don't know how that works. What do you think?
25 originally was under fire.
Yeah.
Well, that 25, but the 25 Ted was talking about adding back was going to go under town hall, I thought.
Why not engineering?
I wasn't here on Tuesday, so I can't.
Well, I also
I
think,
think you raise a good point. I don't know the answer.
I don't know the answer to
But
it.
I also think it's an economy of scale here, where if you're purchasing the services of evaluator, you get more bang for your buck if you do it with more than one facility than focusing on one facility. So, my opinion, I share Mike's concern. However, I think that we have a real need in this town to perform this. And by putting it off a year for these other buildings, I think will ultimately cost us more. And so while I really share Mike's concern about this, my opinion is I wouldn't want to say only focus on the fire station because of the other needs in town.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
All right, so I think we should probably just vote. So I think, I might be putting words in your mouth, but I thought what I heard you saying was spend the 60 only on fire, and maybe we vote the second part separately, which would be sort of future requests for funding of this nature, we prefer to see a warrant article. So all those in favor of the 60 just being spent on fire, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
I think the noes have it.
Can we take a vote?
Or we take it on the-
You need to vote now for that.
Why don't we just vote on the $60,000? I mean, eventually we're gonna have to vote on the budget item, but
Not following your time, so.
Well, we need to figure out, we will vote on the $60,000, but we need to figure out, so let's go around the table.
Aye.
Aye.
No.
No. No. No.
Aye.
no.
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 Aye.
No.
Did somebody count those?
I did, but I have one more than I have, could I just see a show of hands? I think there were 4 in support.
Yeah, I think that's right.
4 in support, okay, and that would be 9 against.
Okay, so the 60 will stay where it is, and will be subject to the control of Town Hall.
Can we vote on the second one? Because
Yes.
that's a separate question.
Yes.
Right, so the second question is whether there should be some expression of our sentiment that future expenditures of this nature be part of a warrant article. All those in favor of that notion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay. And then, so then we come to vote on the held item for Town Hall which is $60,000 in, or actually it was the whole capital budget, right? The amount for town hall and capital is $103,651. All those in favor of town hall capital of $103,651, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes have it. Okay, dispatch.
So,
Dispatch is $675,000. It's on page 3. And was that you, Jim?
so I call for a hold, maybe to make a point and maybe for discussion. And if I remember, the dispatch center, SHREC as its acronym, was put together with the intention of not only being much more efficient than what they currently had at the time, but by regionalizing, and stated in the warrant article, although I don't have the exact wording, was to be a less cost to the town and to the region as a whole. And as I'm seeing through the numbers, that's not occurring, and by a news article of 4 captains of the police department reporting, fire department, I'm sorry, gentlemen, fire department, was, commented that they have great concerns with the system. And that being said, and I don't know what the police's opinion of it at this point, they might want to express their opinion of the system, but are you nervous of keep throwing, and here's the conundrum, keep throwing money at this system if it's not working properly? However, we don't have anything to fall back on. We can't just disband the dispatch center because it's not working the way it should and not fund it.
Chief Perino will give you a cell phone, I think.
So I guess I'd put a hold on it because I'm concerned about keep throwing money at a system that's not meeting the needs, and the professionals who use it are telling you, to their opinion, it's not meeting the needs, which is a great safety concern to the entire community. I haven't heard from the other communities that share the system with us. I don't know if they have other concerns as well. I greatly welcome the opinion of the chief and his deputy chief who are here to,
And
they have an opinion.
Greg actually had that budget, too.
And Greg.
Yes. Well, Chief and Deputy Chief, if you want to fill in after I speak, I certainly do not intend to speak for Chief Duff, who obviously is not here. I'm not sure he would agree with the sentiments that were expressed by the captains in the letter that was in the Hingham Journal last week. He might agree with some parts of it, but I don't think he'd agree with it in total. But I really can't speak to that. I'm not as well versed in that. But I think from a budgetary perspective, the issue, while certainly the expectation was that there would be savings, there are a couple of things to consider. There are other parts of this budget that the SHREC does impact. I believe there's a lower OPEB cost because that cost is now being picked up by the SHREC. So different parts of the budget are moving downward. So you can't necessarily just look at the SHREC budget and think about it that way. Secondly, if you were to talk to Ted, and I do recall he said this when we were originally contemplating this, it was as much for cost avoidance as it was for cost savings. In other words, if we did not move towards this regionalized dispatch, where in the state essentially paid for all the modernization, the town would have had to pay for a lot of that themselves. And this is where I might ask Chief to jump in. I believe our system was antiquated to the point of being beyond obsolete.
Yes, our system was basically junk. And the town, and the capital outlay committee, when they came down and visited our station just recently, they could tell you it was terrible. It was falling apart, and it was going to have to be replaced. And it would have been close to $700,000 just for us. You know.
And then there was also, one of the other things that's driving the budget is right now there are only 4 towns, including Hingham, involved. So the original expectation was that we would have 5, and there's still, I think, a possibility, if not the likelihood, that we're actually going to end up with 6 towns participating, because I think Rockland
the dispatch center was built for 6 towns.
Right, and there is the likelihood that Situate and Rockland.
There's a number of towns that have expressed interest to come in. Yes.
So once those come in, obviously the costs get shared by a greater number of towns, and it'll cause our piece to go down. So I don't think anybody would deny there have been growing pains, and that this didn't meet the initial very optimistic expectations that were put out there. But I think to just look at one line item in the budget and say it's been a failure would be incorrect.
I'm not saying it's
No,
a
and
failure. It's a
I'm
different
not-
way to measure if it's a failure or success. And just the perception of people who read the warrant article and wording says it'll save the town money. And I don't want to sacrifice safety for the dollar, but, you know, the perception is from news articles and from looking at the numbers that it's costing more, and we're getting, there are some, to some professionals, some failures in the system. They get nervous about spending more money until we know that the system is working the way it should.
Well, I'll work with both Chief Perino and Chief Duff, and we'll be prepared to address anybody's concerns at town meeting on that point.
Is
Give
it
it-
fair to say that the Board of Selectmen have just as acute interest in this as we do?
Yes, absolutely, if not more so.
Chief, did you have additional comments?
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, has there been issues? Yes, there has. We've been working very closely with the SHREC. When we have a procedure in our department, I'm not going to speak for the fire, I'm speaking strictly for the police department. We have a procedure that if there's an issue with the dispatch center, we have a form that our supervisors fill out. They fill it out, the deputy investigates the complaint, and sometimes we found out it wasn't the dispatch center. And if it is indeed a problem with the dispatch center, then the deputy goes to the director over there. The director gives us feedback on a complaint, and then it's shared with the officers. We're not gonna go public with the issues we have, because we're dealing with security, and we're not gonna let the bad guys know if we have any issues out there, you know? But, you know, it's talking with, you know, dispatch centers around the country, you know, you're talking a good year after you get going, that things are gonna clear up. The town of Cohasset did not come in until August. So with the 4 towns, we haven't even been running together for, you know, 6, 7 months, you know. But I will, you know, I'm gonna tell you that, you know, we have a policy which we use to address the issues, and, you know, I'm confident that the public's safety is not in jeopardy. With the complaints we've had, it's not the public's safety, it's officer safety, and we've addressed them. And it's a work in progress. It's, you know, it's not gonna, you know, we're gonna have our issues, but we're working with them.
Other questions for the chief? Other questions on the dispatch budget? Before you take your seat, Mary shared with me the article. You started your day off a little roughly in the department with an accident involving a school bus, right? Was that this morning?
Yeah, it was a van. Yeah, it was.
Everybody was okay, though, and
Yes, yes.
that's great. Thank you.
Unless God heard anything different.
No, every child is home, and many of them.
Yeah, fortunately, it was a very minor accident.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, are we ready to vote the dispatch budget? Okay.
Thank you, Chief.
Thanks.
Thank you, thank you. So the dispatch budget that was held is $675,000. All those in favor of the dispatch budget, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Budget is approved. Okay, debt service. Thank you, Chief. Good night. Page 8. Debt service of $7,368,224. Is that
That was me,
correct?
yes.
Okay.
More a procedural question. If I understand it right, there's a placeholder in here for the Fields project,
That's correct.
based on an assumption, I wasn't here Tuesday, based on an assumption of 3.75 million and
Over
appropriate,
Yeah, over 15 years at 2%.
okay.
It's
That-
really a guess. I mean, just-
Yeah, it's just a placeholder.
Right. So how does, we're voting on this tonight, how does that factor into the whole process? In terms of when we're voting on a placeholder that's gonna have, I guess, 2 votes, one at town meeting, and one at town election. I'm just kind of wondering how that all works.
I think there is certainly a little bit of putting the cart before the horse here, but I think otherwise we would have to wait until the school department had hard numbers, which isn't gonna happen, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Gallo, until the first week in April or so.
Yes, we would get out to bid and hope to have numbers for town meeting, not that could be incorporated in the warrant, but at the time of town
So, given that we didn't want to hold off the budget process till then, I think Ted made a very educated guess as to what the number would be. And if it ends up that that number's higher, I'll be honest, I don't know how we would address that. Either we would have to amend the budget, the motion to approve the budget at a town meeting,
Or we could have a reduction in the principal payment. My understanding was that the total borrowing costs for the first year are unlikely to be at $325, so that there would be room in the principal portion, which is $250,000, to make an adjustment for either, you know, a rate increase or the amount of principal increasing. So I think there is some play in that number. The intent now would be, if the project came in at that number, we borrowed at that rate, the intent would be to make a principal payment. My understanding from Ted is we're not required to make that principal payment in the first year. So, right, so there'd be, that's where the adjustment, I think, would be made, unless, as Greg suggests, you know, there would be a motion on the floor of town meeting to change the debt service number.
Also, I think based on what Ted said related to the fire station too, that if they finance it just for 1 year out of the gate, the interest charge would be lower because it would be at 0.2% versus 2%. So that $75,000 in the interest portion would be presumably lower.
But someone's likely to ask a question or two about that, so. Do you have any other questions?
No, that's satisfying.
Anybody else have questions about the debt service number? If not, we come to vote on the debt service number, which is $7,368,224. All those in favor of debt service, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Okay. Lizzie, you sure? Do you have anything you want to say? Or?
No, I guess I had just wanted to say I was a little taken aback the other night with Ted and how he was dealing with the capital outlay. And then when I went to the capital outlay, what I could of the meeting last night, you know how we really made a conscious effort to fund OPEB. I really feel like in the future we really need to make a conscious effort to fund capital outlay. I think we have a lot of structural and maintenance issues, and now that we're sort of starting to have a little bit of money come in, I think people are getting all excited and saying, oh, we're going to do this and do that, and maybe these things that aren't necessarily needs but wants. And I really am concerned that we are not addressing some of the structural deficits and things like that that we have with our buildings and our assets, in that we really, and I guess my thought was, after what Tom said the other night, capital outlay is kind of like the orphan child in our budget, because it doesn't really have a department head who really can lobby for it politically or say this is what we really need. I mean, they're a really smart, small group of hardworking people, but I feel like in the last few years I've seen us take money and sort of, you know, they might have $2 million requests or whatever, and we just put it down to $1 million, and it kind of gets picked on a lot. And I really think that we maybe ought to make a conscious effort to focus on funding that and really looking at what the maintenance needs and possibly construction needs for our assets are in the future. I mean, I just think it's really taken a huge hit in the last 5 years or so.
Okay. All right, so
Could I respond to that? And this has not been discussed in the capital outlay committee, so this is me speaking, not anybody else. I have a little different view than Ted does on the concept of bonding the vehicles, not the real estate, but the vehicles in the capital budget, and by doing that through funding either bonds or some sort of financing. I believe that vehicles are operating assets and should be funded through operating expenses. If we had spent at the $2.5 million level for capital over the last 5 years, we would have spent an additional $5 million over those last 5 years on capital assets. If we keep to a $2.5 million budget, which is, I think, roundly what the depreciation factor for maintenance is for those items, in the next 5 years, that would get us above and beyond where we are spending today of an additional $5 million. That $5 million would take care of the fire equipment and would take care of the police department and would take care of the DPW. So to a certain extent, funding through a bonding for these assets, I think is inappropriate. Having said that, I think we're in a position today where we actually have to do it for the next round of vehicles for maybe not only the fire department, but for the DPW as well. But I'm not pleased with that.
Okay. Okay, I'd like to move now back to Articles O and P. We took them up when we had several absences. We wanted to wait for you all to join us before we voted. O and P, you may recall, are the selectmen initiatives for tax relief utilizing meals tax funds to reduce the tax rate in fiscal year 15, which is when we'd see the steepest bump up in our debt service costs, principally because of the coming online of the full borrowing of the middle school project. Jim, do you want to take us through maybe just a brief synopsis, and then we can move to vote?
For the enjoyment of those folks at home.
Just a little rerun. You can take a break and.
Sure. Effectively, the essence of these articles is to satisfy the selectmen's objective relative to tax relief. And to summarize, the selectmen went through a process with the help of the town administrator to focus on the various alternatives that they had for both targeted and broad tax relief. Following extensive study, which includes some folks, members of the town, as well as selectmen and the administrator, they determined that that they felt the most appropriate way to enact tax relief was to really focus on the utilization of the meals tax revenue, which was first established in 2010. It's anticipated that by the end of this fiscal year, will have generated, by the end of next fiscal year, we'll generate close to $2.2 million in meals tax revenue. So the selectmen are proposing through these articles to effectively earmark those towards helping to reduce the debt exclusion impact, primarily from the middle school in fiscal year, middle school in fiscal year 2015. So as illustrated in this chart, which I believe everyone now has, in connection with some other tax relief methods, which have included the reduction of the actual building costs of the middle school, as well as a reduction in the interest expense that the bond issue will basically be charged. That will bring down the fiscal year 2015 debt exclusion impact for the average resident from $725 to $425. So a pretty significant decrease for all resident taxpayers here in Hingham. It will also help smooth the impact of the debt exclusion increase beginning in 2015, with the anticipated use of further meals tax revenue also being utilized and used for the same reasoning. That will any of that use beyond fiscal year 2015 will also need to go through town meeting approval. So we're focused on utilizing the accumulated meals tax revenue to help reduce the impact of debt exclusions in fiscal year 2015. Article O, basically how it works is that the revenue that is collected is basically held within the general fund until it's allocated to the meals tax stabilization fund. Article O basically gives the approval to utilize the money that is collected in the general fund to be used to offset the fiscal year 2015 tax rate. Article P specifically discusses the money at this point that has now been deposited into the meals tax stabilization fund to once again be used for that same purpose.
Are there any questions on these articles from the folks who weren't with us earlier this evening?
Yes, I have a question.
Laura?
I hope, it may have been asked earlier, I don't know. Do the Board of Selectmen intend to do this every year after year now?
I believe it's their intention to continue to
Continue to
utilize
do
that, and it's, the average amount of revenue that's collected has been around $600,000 a year.
Is there a reason they didn't consider an underride, which would remove the necessity of voting it out of the stabilization fund every year and then into the tax reduction?
No idea.
It seems to me a much more efficient way to do it. It would make it permanent.
I believe, I don't know the answer to your question, Laura, other than to say I am almost certain from talking to Ted that they did consider it. Well, what the results of that deliberation were, I don't know.
Any appetite for
Didn't he
considering
say
it
that-
here?
Didn't he say that that would affect the calculation for the 2.5% in future years, and that's why?
Could, yes. He said if the town decides to do any kind of underride, like they did in Plymouth, that can build up into the levy, so let's say 4 years down the line, that's underride difference could then be used in one lump sum as an increase to the levy. They could do that. I mean,
Well,
they
what's
could
more
also not get
risky?
elected the next year if they did that, but, I mean, they run that risk, but yes, they could say, we want to use the $2 million we saved over the last 3 years and use it now. And that would be quite a burden, I think, on the taxpayers as an increase to the
Yeah.
tax levy.
I think it's more likely that after 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, or however many years after the bump of this, the impact of this project wears off, town meeting might decide to do something different with the money. So I think if we want it to be permanent tax relief, the way to do it would be to do an underride. So I would propose an amendment to, I don't even know if we could do that with this.
I think you're out of order on that.
Okay, so.
I think,
Since we can't do it, we won't, but
no, I mean,
we'll consider it for next year.
I mean, I think it's a conversation that needs to occur for next year, and the warrant article before us is a
Yeah.
sort of specifically framed
Okay.
for this particular question. Any other questions with respect to O or P?
Good question.
Okay, are we ready to vote? Would you like to make a motion, Mr. Taylor?
I would love to. I'd like to make a motion that the town transfer $620,513 from the general fund that has not been added to the meals, which has not been added to the meals tax stabilization fund for the purpose of reducing the fiscal year 2015 tax rate.
I think you do actually have to mention this netting, because otherwise.
That's the net amount I just read.
Right, but I think I think we should read the parenthetical, that this
Should I?
represents the
Okay.
amount of meals tax collected less $20,000.
All right, because I totally made that up. Okay. That wasn't town.
Well, you wrote it down.
Did I sound like
Yeah, you sounded like.
I knew what I was doing? I would like to make a motion that the town transfer $620,513 from the general fund. This represents the amount of meals tax collected less $20,000 that has not been added to the meals tax stabilization fund for the purpose of reducing the fiscal year 2015 tax rate.
Well, does anyone wish to second the recommended motion, including the parenthetical?
Live and on camera.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor of Article O recommended motion as read, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Do you wish to be recorded?
No,
that
that's all right.
Okay.
Just making my point.
Abstentions. Article O carries.
Oh, all right, record me, you're right, just in case. Sorry.
Mr. Taylor. Okay, so Laura Marwell has voted against Article O, and she's been recorded. Article P.
I'd also like to make a motion that the town transfer $744,120 from the meals tax stabilization fund for the purpose of reducing the fiscal year 2015 tax rate.
Second? Second. There's been a motion and a second. Any discussion on Article P? All those in favor of Article P as read, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
There's another no.
All right. Yes, please.
Laura Marwell has voted no and has been recorded. Otherwise, the motion carries. Okay, liaison updates. Craig.
Not a liaison update, but I was sent home to do some homework on 2 articles that I think we could get out of the way tonight.
I would love to do that.
Weren't noticed, though?
Yeah, sorry. But you did your homework, so I'll
I'll
make a note of that.
It's the Hannah White.
You want to change it to Hannah White.
Maybe just for the folks at home, well, no, sorry.
All right.
I think I have you on the agenda for beginning of March. All right, the next thing on my list,
Would you accept the motion to
Oh,
adjourn?
can I, before we end, can I ask a question? Monday, we're gonna hear the fields.
yes, we are.
Okay. Yeah, as you mentioned just earlier, they don't have a price to give us of the cost of this. Are we voting Monday or just hearing?
No, we're just hearing it.
Okay, because my concern is, how do I vote on this project without knowing the cost? And I'll add to, I've never seen a picture or a rendering, architectural rendering of what this is supposed to look like. It's kind of like, as I made an analogy once, it's kind of telling someone, I want to buy a house, and you haven't told me the cost of what it looks like, and now you
Okay,
expect me to buy it.
wait a minute. I don't think
No, no.
Wait, just a second.
Okay.
I don't think the view question is quite fair, because I think there are and have been.
At public hearings.
At tons
Okay.
of public hearings, okay? So and I'm quite certain that those views will be part of what we see. With respect to the number, we're hearing it Monday. We're scheduled to vote it the following Monday, which is March 11th.
Okay,
And between those two dates, it'll be my job to figure out, whether we vote some sort of placeholder or whether we don't vote and we have a supplemental comment for town meeting.
okay.
So,
And just to, the school committee has had estimates since September of what the cost of the project is going to be, and they have updated those, and they have made those public. So it isn't that we're, as a matter of fact, the comments section that you will see Friday, tomorrow, includes the latest estimate of what the costs are.
And fairly accurate and close to
They're
the.
estimates from their engineers, but they have not gone out for cost, and the bids have not gone out. And we won't know that number until town meeting.
Will Conservation have voted by then?
Yes,
Monday,
they're expected to vote on Monday.
The same night we meet, but probably after we're meeting or during?
I have,
Because
Karen's
that-
responsible for juggling that so that we can do both.
Is there any doubt that they'll make a decision Monday from Concom?
They've postponed it a couple of weeks, so
And if they vote no, what happens?
it could solve our problem. It's anybody's guess, right? Yeah. Lucy?
I have an unrelated thing, just if you do want to see Old Derby and the Heritage Museum, I have one taker right now. If anybody else would like to go.
Are you buying coffee?
Let me know,
I will
and I
buy
will tell
coffee.
Mark.
Anyone else wants to come with me? Can I make one comment?
Yeah.
I just want to publicly thank the folks relative to the budget process, and more specifically, I'd like to recognize the Education Subcommittee. I know they spent countless
That's a good one.
hours, and they did a lot of hard work to get us to where we ended up. And I also want to thank the capital outlay folks, too, for all their
That's a
hard
very
work
good
on
point.
getting us there. So thank you all for your hard work and making our life a little bit easier.
Laura, I left a couple minutes early. Did the Board of, how did the Board of Selectmen
They
vote?
voted in favor unanimously of the advisory committee recommended budget.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so now,
Bob?
I've already moved.
all right, there's been a
I'll
motion to
second.
adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
We're good.
Karen, only 10 minutes.
I can see it.